Okay, we'll just give it a second for everybody to come in the room. All right, so if we make a start, just because I'm aware that this is a fairly short half-an-hour webinar, I just wanted to welcome and introduce Miranda Adams from Skills Builder. So, Simon carrying out an inclusive practice series at the moment, partly to help with the capacity crisis and low diversity within the sector, and looking at ways that employers can proactively make changes towards their own practice to support a change in that area. Skills Builder is a really amazing tool. It's something that when I was managing a reserve myself, I inherited a very old format of recruitment, and some of it wasn't particularly good at finding what we knew then as transferable skills, but Miranda will introduce as essential skills. And this tool is really useful both from a recruitment point of view, but also a staff development point of view as well. But just to highlight, we will be carrying out another webinar with Miranda later in the autumn of this year to look at the staff development point of view. So today we're going to focus on how to use it in a recruitment perspective. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Miranda.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian. It's lovely to be here with you all today. Thanks so much for listening and watching. So as Brian said, I'm going to be talking about how we can use the universal framework to support inclusive recruitment. So as an overview of what I'll be covering in the session, I'll firstly introduce you to Skills Builder Partnership, so please don't worry if you haven't heard of us before. I'll talk through what the benefits are of skills-based recruitment and that shift we're starting to see towards hiring for skills as opposed to just experience and qualifications. What's the challenge? We're going to unpack actually the challenge people are facing in terms of recruiting and making sure that their recruitment is inclusive and that they've got a really wide pool of applicants to choose from. We're going to unpack the universal framework and explore that. We'll then have a look at how we can actually apply the universal framework to recruitment practices, and end with a few next steps and some questions that I'd love for you all to take away and have a think about. So to start with an introduction, going back to the very beginning, what are essential skills? So of course, when you're looking to recruit someone for your organization, you are looking for a variety of different things for them to bring to the role. You want them to have certain knowledge. You'll want them to have certain character attributes that will mean they'll fit in well with your organization, but also you want them to have certain skills. It's really important, however, to subdivide this category of skills so that we're really clear on what are the basic skills an individual needs. So what are, for example, the basic numeracy and literacy requirements? Some basic digital skills might fall under that category too. At the top of this pyramid of specificity, we've got our technical skills. Really important to distinguish what those are as well. So these are specific skills that are required to do a specific job role. And finally, in the middle, and the skills that I'm here to talk to you about are the essential skills. And these are the ones that are often overlooked or assumed, which can lead to a number of challenges. Essential skills are essentially the highly transferable skills that individuals need to do almost any role successfully. And they're incredibly useful and important across a whole diversity of roles and organizations. At Skills Builder, we identified 8 of these essential skills after a rigorous research process looking across lots of different sectors and existing versions of different frameworks. These were the 8 common threads throughout each of these different sectors and contexts. So listening and speaking, 2 communication skills. We've got problem solving and creativity, creative problem solving, critical thinking. We've got staying positive and aiming high, so our self-management skills, and we've also got leadership and teamwork. So a little bit about Skills Builder. So we are a social enterprise that exists to overcome what we call the skills trap, and you can see that exemplified on the screen here now. So essentially what we find is that sometimes people from less advantaged backgrounds often have fewer opportunities to build essential skills at school. This means that their skill levels are lower, and that we might also see the case that they have actually a lower desire to build these essential skills, as there isn't necessarily a value placed on them. They then leave school and are likely going to be in a lower skilled job earning lower income. And in those roles, often we find that there are fewer opportunities to build essential skills. We then find that that can lead to lower levels of life satisfaction, and it's a continuing spiral. And essentially what we want to do is to ensure that one day everyone will build the essential skills they need to succeed, and we want people to break out of this cycle. We are a capacity building organisation, so although we're only a small team of about 35 people, at the moment we have a large impact through our partners, whether that's through our education partners, building the capacity of schools and colleges to deliver great essential skills education for every single learner, or whether that's through really impactful employer programs where we support different businesses to embed high quality approaches to essential skill development across their outreach, recruitment, and their learning and development. What we really want to do is create that golden thread of language around these essential skills to support people to continuously reflect on and build on the skills that they are developing, and continue to bring what they're learning from one context as they move into the next. So as I mentioned, there are 3 key areas that we're supporting employers in: outreach, recruitment, and learning and development. We will share the slides after this webinar, so I'm leaving a few of these slides with extra information in so that you can go back and review that if you are interested. So what is the benefit of skills-based recruitment then? So there are a number of different reasons why you should start to consider recruiting for essential skills. So firstly, what we're seeing is an increased performance and productivity for those organizations that are placing a value on essential skills when they are looking to recruit new candidates. We're also seeing organizations that recruit for essential skills building a better resilience to change, and times are changing very quickly at the moment. We're finding that there's an enhanced employer value proposition. It's really important, especially when trying to recruit young people, to try and think about what you are offering them. It's something that they really value, and offering opportunities to continue to develop these skills, as well as showing that you value them at the recruitment stage, can be really attractive for someone looking to join your organization. And lastly, increased diversity of talent. So moving away from looking at just specific experience someone might have had, or the specific qualifications they've been able to get, and actually think about all the essential skills they've been able to build in various other areas of their life up to this point. So lots of benefits and reasons why we should be recruiting for essential skills. There's also a whole range of evidence that we're starting to see in the employment space. So as you can see, hiring for essential skills is 5 times more predictive of job performance than hiring for education. That came out of a report by McKinsey in 2022. Expanding the talent search to include workers with relevant skills led to, on average, a 9.4 times increase in eligible workers across all jobs. That was from a LinkedIn research paper from 2023. And finally, from our essential skills tracker in 2023, we found that 92% of workers in the UK believe that essential skills are important for success within their career. So a real value placed on them. On top of that, research has also shown that 2/3 of people in the UK would be more likely to apply for a role when essential skills are provided as part of the job specification. So a real value on the emphasis of those essential skills, and really encouraging people to think about how they might apply for roles which they otherwise might have discounted or feel that they're not necessarily qualified for. So what's the challenge? So at the moment, what we're seeing is a real lack of clarity around these essential skill requirements. What we find is that often there are unclear job descriptions to start with, which often cause an element of confusion for prospective candidates. Recruiters often assume that certain candidates can and will demonstrate certain skills, and unfortunately, when they are then recruited and start at a role, they might realise that they've made a mistake in assuming that people have a certain base level of these essential skills that they need to succeed in their roles. And lastly, brilliant candidates without direct experience are unsure how their transferable skills apply to the role. I've put some examples on the right-hand side of my screen, so you can see here the sort of language that we might be quite familiar with, unfortunately, when we're looking through different job descriptions. And this isn't supposed to be kind of shaming you if this is similar to what you have. This is just supposed to be a way of kind of reflecting and thinking about how we can improve this to make this much more specific. So as you can see, experienced, or desire to learn, resourceful, good communicator, all quite vague. Customer service representative for this role, outstanding interpersonal skills, for example, excellent leadership skills. I'm sure that's something that we've seen a lot. But again, very broad, not very specific. So how can we address this? So what we're suggesting is that we can utilize the universal framework to clarify the language around essential skills required for a job role. So what we want to really do is use a consistent language around the skills that employers are recruiting for, using that to clearly communicate the skill requirements for a job role across all levels, but especially at early career roles where people don't necessarily have experience of a different job role. And so maybe a lot less clear on what it is they're bringing to this role when they are applying, possibly for the first time. And finally, bring a fair and objective assessment across a selection process, attracting a much wider pool of talent. So you can see here a much better example that has broken down the different types of skills. I didn't have much space to include the whole job description, so I've just included the section for project manager around the essential skills required. So you can see that they have stated the specific skills that they're going to need for that project manager role. Not only that, they've linked to the universal framework, so applicants are supported to actually prepare for the process of applying and possibly going through an interview. And lastly, they have also tried to specify the minimum requirement for each of the essential skills. So for leadership, it's the ability at a minimum to recognise the strengths and weaknesses of others in a team and allocate roles accordingly. The candidate now will be really clear on what it is they need to do in that role, what they're going to need to talk about in an interview, so that it becomes much easier to then actually have a bit more of an objective assessment for these candidates. So let's unpack the universal framework in a bit more detail. So the universal framework, and what I'll do is I'll just pop a link to the framework in the chat for you. Hopefully that will take you to the universal framework. The universal framework is, as I mentioned, a framework that supports lifelong skill development and provides a clear map for progression in essential skills. So what we did initially, as I mentioned, was outlined 8 of these essential skills, identified what they were, and gave them all consistent definitions. So at the very start, we are speaking the same language around these essential skills. My definition of teamwork, for example, and what good teamwork looks like, might be different from yours. Therefore, it's really important to make sure that from the beginning, when we're talking about each of these skills, it's really clear what we are talking about. What we then did was further subdivided each of these skills into 4 stages of development, and then further divide them into 16 learnable steps so that individuals can really specifically reflect on these skills and pinpoint exactly what it is about these skills that they're really good at and confident to demonstrate, but also what are their areas for development and what do they need to work on in order to improve in this specific skill step by step. This is an example of what this looks like for leadership. So as you can see, the initial steps are focused on getting started and understanding emotions. So knowing how you feel about something or knowing how to explain your feelings about something to your team. At the intermediate stage, it's all around managing tasks. So these steps are all around, for example, managing time and sharing resources or managing group discussions to reach a shared decision. At the advanced stage, it's all around managing and supporting others, so possibly supporting others through mentorship. And at the mastery stage, it's all around adaptive leadership. So are you able to reflect on your own leadership style, for example, and its effect on others? And even better, are you able to adapt your own leadership style and build on your strengths and weaknesses when you're working with different audiences? It's worth also mentioning, thank you, Brian, maybe there was something wrong with my link. It's worth also mentioning that we have just launched our Universal Framework 2.0, which is essentially our new and improved version. That's not to say there's anything in particular wrong with the first version, but when we first launched it in 2020, we always said that we would do a review after it's been used across a whole variety of different contexts and even globally after 5 years. So it is now 2025. And we have completed that year-long review and have launched our Framework 2.0. We have done a soft launch initially, but what we are looking to do is have that all up and running and ready to go by the summer. So what I'll also do in the chat is I will pop a link to the toolkit that you can download, which is essentially an early sneak peek. And on here, what you can see are some of the changes that we've made. For example, small tweaks like changing some of the skill names, adapting. That used to be staying positive. We found adapting better actually encapsulated what the different steps in that stage, in that skill meant. And instead of aiming high, it's now planning. The others all stayed very similar. You can also see some of the changes we've made here just to ensure that it is as accessible, it is as inclusive, and it is as responsive to feedback as possible. What I really like about the new version of the framework too is that we've got these short summaries of what each of these steps actually mean before diving into the skill step language, which has also been simplified quite a lot. So again, really would encourage you to have a look through that if you get a chance. So what I wanted to show you now as a quick activity is two versions of these skills sections of a job description. So version 1, as you can see, summarizes the skills someone will need for this particular role. So strong verbal and written communication, excellent telephone skills, initiative and good decision-making skills, and project management skills. And then version 2 shows you what this would look like if we had utilized the framework. So outlining 4 of the essential skills that are most important for this role, but also outlining the minimum requirements as well as linking to the framework so that an applicant can really clearly see what exactly they need to demonstrate and what they should talk about. I've got 2 questions for you, and I'd be grateful if you could pop some responses into the chat. So number 1 is, how does version 2 support the career changer? And number 2 is, how does version 2 support the hiring manager?
So just a quickie, I think the chat is disabled, but you can do this in the Q&A section. So the same way of responding, but if you want to use the Q&A section.
Where is the Q&A section, sorry?
It's just at the bottom of the screen along the menu. So it's two to the right of the chat. Do you not see it on yours?
No, funnily enough, I cannot. Oh, if I click on more, I can see the Q&A. Aha. I don't seem to be able to open it. It says no open questions, only hosts and panelists can see the questions.
Yes, that means we've had no answers thus far.
Do we need to open a question for them to be able to answer though?
No, I don't think so. Sarah is listening in, so she can correct me if I'm wrong. But can I have a stab at the first one?
Yeah, of course, go for it.
So in terms of the problem solving one is the one I've aimed in on for the career changer. So exploring complex problems by analyzing the causes and effects allows them to use previous examples.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And in terms of the hiring manager, is there anything that is particularly useful for the business about version 2?
So yeah, I'm guessing, so looking at the tone, expression, and gesture is something that I know I can look out for during the interview process.
Yeah,
It gives
absolutely.
me guidance to what I could look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. So much more specific, definitely. And if you've got different people who are going through interview processes and wanting to compare different responses from the people they've interviewed, can be really helpful to have that more objective view and a bit more of a success criteria using the framework to be able to compare different answers. So yeah, absolutely. So I guess some of the things that you might be thinking as well are increased confidence to apply, leading to more applications, widening the talent pool. So as the person who is looking for a new role, sometimes it's quite off-putting if what you're reading is extremely vague. You might undersell yourself and think, well, they say this, but I don't think I'm at that point. If it's more specific, people are much more likely to kind of assess themselves more objectively or accurately and maybe feel more confident to apply, and therefore, as I said, widen that talent pool. Applications received are often of a much higher quality because answers are much more specific and much more targeted at what the business actually want you to talk about and want to read in these applications or hear in these interviews. So again, that can be a real benefit for the business, but also the recruiter, as I mentioned, has a much more objective view of what they need to see.
I've just seen Owen's popped an answer in the chat. So Owen, I think, is recruiting somebody soon. He's just started an exciting new project called Hotspots around the UK. So he's put an
Brilliant.
answer in there to say that question one had clearer goals, and question two, there were steps to review to test skills rather than just trusting someone saying they have a certain experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's very easy for anyone to say, I'm brilliant at speaking. I've done lots of public speaking, and you say, okay, what about your speaking is good? And that framework can really support you to test that. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, so let's have a look now at applying the universal framework to recruitment practices. So what I wanted to outline in the last part of this webinar is exactly the process that you would go through to actually start updating some of your job descriptions and having a think about how you are recruiting. So firstly, categorize. So the first step is to building an effective person specification is to create clear and separate categories for these 4 different things. So qualifications that are different from experience, that are different from technical skills, and that are different from essential skills, and making sure that's really clear in your mind before that's even communicated on the job descriptions. Step 2 is around clarifying the job description. So at this point, once you've got those 4 different categories, you want to review what you've got in the language of those categories and try and remove vague phrases like team player or good communicator, and try to make them a bit more objective, a bit less subjective, and try and avoid those phrases that can often be quite open to different interpretation by applicants, hiring managers, and the interviewers. So what you want to do is try and determine the minimum essential skill requirements. So if you've said good communicator and you've had a look at the speaking framework, for example, and you see the step that says able to listen critically and compare different perspectives and identify that as the minimum requirement, you would need to communicate that using that language on your job description. And that leads me on to the last step, which is to communicate. So as I said, have a think about how you're communicating these requirements in your job description. You might want to, for example, review your recruitment materials. Maybe you've got some candidate preparation guidance that people can use. Maybe you've got a link to the framework so that people can access that themselves. Maybe you've got some advice and guidance for those doing the interviewing. So they're really clear on what the success criteria are for different answers, and they know what a good answer is, what a bad answer is, and what exactly it is they're looking for. That looks more broadly than just someone's experience or the qualifications they've been able to get so far, which, as we know, aren't necessarily equally available to everybody. So what I've also got on the next slide, before I move on, in terms of what's next, so I outlined that first step process, which is actually how you update those job descriptions and how we would work with you at Skills Builder if you were interested in working with us more bespokely. But what you would then look to do ideally is think about the whole process. So the Universal Framework for Essential Skills can also be a really fantastic tool for effectively assessing candidates during the selection process. So not just thinking about outlining the job specification, the job description, and supporting the applicant, but actually how can we take that step further so that this is really fed through the selection process, and ideally even further, once that successful candidate starts working for you, how can we continue to build on some of these brilliant strengths that we've outlined in the interview process and make sure that those candidates have a chance to practice these in their roles and also to develop those areas that maybe they scored less highly on. What I've included in the slides as well, as I mentioned, and you will receive these, is some additional guidance. So some advice on how you can actually go about starting this process for yourself, taking that initial slide a step further. So thinking about how we get to know our existing job descriptions, reading through the descriptions, highlighting any of the references to essential skills. That categorization piece is really that starting point. Where are the explicit references to essential skills already? So maybe you've already written that they need to be a good communicator, for example, or they need to be a good team player. But you might find that there's quite a few things you're asking of them that are actually implicit references to essential skills. So making sure you highlight that and try and make those more explicit as well. And are there any essential skills that are missing? Often we find when we're doing this process with an organization, there are quite a few things they're just assuming these candidates will be able to do, and that they really do want to be able to, they really should state on those job descriptions as well. Secondly, exploring the framework, explore the relevant essential skills that you've highlighted and think about which steps help you to clarify the requirements for that particular role. I'd really encourage you to think as well about the specific steps that individuals need to bring to a role already, and what are some of the steps that actually they could build and develop in role. And that might help you to also kind of widen your net as well in terms of those applicants. And finally, how you're communicating that on job description. So thinking about how you're categorizing it, making sure that's consistent across your job descriptions, and making sure that you're using the language of the framework to communicate really clearly and avoiding that ambiguity. Here's an example of what we might look to see when we've seen this done successfully. So as you can see, I've taken it a step further than just categorizing, which is a really good starting point. But instead of saying, for example, strong speaking and listening skills, I've taken that a step further and I have broken that down into the specific steps. So I want my applicant to speak effectively by making points in a logical order. And I've linked to speaking step 3 on the framework as well. I wanted to end on just a case study, which is an example of our work with Morgan Sindel. So they are an infrastructure organisation, and they work across lots of core sectors. We've worked in partnership with them since 2021, so they've been a long-time partner. And essentially, one of the things that we did initially on their programme was look to add clarity to their early careers recruitment process, specifically looking at their job descriptions for apprentices and also graduate roles. So they are a brilliant example of the process that I just spoke through, and I can share some more information about them on our case study page as well. They saw a lot of success. They had an 170% increase in the number of applicants applying for a role from the initial year to the next year once they updated the essential skill requirements. So really shows how people are much more likely to apply for a role when these essential skills are communicated really clearly. They took it a step further too, and they started to embed the essential skills into their assessment centres and also into their candidate feedback as well, so that everyone went away with something useful they could work on, whether they were successful or not. And you can see in the slides that I'll share as well an example of exactly how they communicated this and how they linked out to the universal framework. And as I mentioned, they had an over 170% increase in early career applicants, and over 70 high quality applicants were invited for selection. The last few slides, I've just included a bit of information around what working with Skills Builder is like. In case you're interested, I'd be really happy to continue the conversation with anyone who would like to learn more about the organisation and how we can support you on a Skills Builder employer programme. There's some information about what you would get access to, including bespoke support, including volunteering opportunities for you to virtually engage with schools across the country to talk about your role and your organisation, as well as accreditations for your outreach work, as well as for your organisation, so our excellence mark. And as I said, there's lots more information there. I know I'm very close to time, but I wanted to leave you with a few questions to have a think about as we are wrapping up. So firstly, how confident do you feel now? Hopefully you feel a bit more confident in understanding the framework and how it might be applied in your context. Are you anticipating any challenges at this point? And how will you begin to implement this as well? You might already start to think about someone you want to speak to about this within your organisation, or booking in a follow-up call. You're very welcome to pop your email address in the chat as well if you're interested in a follow-up. What I will also do is pop a link to our prospectus, where you can also find out more about Skills Builder, and you are very, very welcome to download that. I would love to continue the conversation. In terms of action planning, you might want to start thinking about some job descriptions, or what conversations need to be had to better understand the minimum skill requirements, and also deciding on a few timelines can be really helpful. And that is everything from me. If anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to hang on for a little bit. But otherwise, it was lovely to speak to you all, and thank you so much for your time.
Miranda, thank you very much for that. I've got a question. While you were talking about wording in job descriptions confusing people, I fired up quite a well-known sector-related job board. And the first advert I saw for the first job I clicked on said that they're looking for an enthusiastic person. And another point, they asked for a great communicator as well. And I wondered, from your perspective, at what point do the barriers start? Is the job advert as important as the job description for getting those wording consistent throughout the recruitment as well.
I think so, absolutely. I think it's that initial interaction someone will have with that role, and I think they make a very quick decision as to whether they would be a good person for that role, and they would be a good fit. So I think you can lose out on a lot of applicants by not communicating on the actual job advert as well.
Okay, so that's really crucial to know that it starts from the very, very earliest point. And I'm guessing, as well as creating new job adverts, you can retrofit every job that you've got running throughout your
Absolutely, yeah,
organization with this.
absolutely. And it's not just early careers, it can go all the way up, and can hopefully eventually be linked to other staff development that you've got within your organization, and how you encourage people to move from one level to another.
Which we're going to explore more in
Yeah,
a webinar with you in the autumn, which I'm really
a good end
excited about as well.
point.
Yeah, I'll leave it on a cliffhanger. Miranda, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I always learn a little bit more about Skills Builder every time I find out more about it. So really appreciate your time this lunchtime. And yes, we will be sending these out to anybody who watched today, and we'll be adding it to YouTube as well, so you can share away. But this will not be the last time crossover with Skills Builder. So I look forward to the next time. Miranda, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.